Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube. I'm Ankur Desai. Welcome to this episode. Today I'm joined by our UK political correspondent, Rob Watson. Rob, as always, great to have you with us. We're going to start in Westminster. It's been an incredibly challenging week for the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Good to be with you, and absolutely, what an extraordinary week in British politics. Where to begin? Well, I guess at the start on Monday is probably the best place, Anchor, and the fact that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, faced a 2.5-hour grilling and battering in the House of Commons in Parliament, the like of which I just can't really remember seeing. I watched, and at some point, thinking of a boxing analogy, I was wondering, this is just so horrible. Is the referee going to step in and stop the fight, stop the boxer from getting injured anymore? It was that bloody. Now, what was it about? Well, Sir Keir Starmer had gone to the House of Commons to mount his defence for appointing Peter Mandelson to the job as British ambassador to Washington, essentially saying, look, had I known that there'd been a vetting process that turned up all sorts of security problems about him, I would never have appointed him. But I mean, most MPs either didn't believe him or thought, well, even if that was true, why on earth didn't you have a bit more of a grip on the process? But actually, the reason why there was so much of a problem for the Prime Minister is most just didn't believe him. They thought, look, you didn't care about security and vetting issues with Mandelson. You just wanted to get him there to Washington ASAP for Donald Trump's inauguration.
And Rob, a name that's become a focal point in recent days is Olly Robbins. He was the highest ranking civil servant in the Foreign Office until he was sacked last week. And now, to quote him, he's described it as an atmosphere of constant pressure to send Peter Mandelson to Washington as ambassador. Now, why would the UK government be so keen to have him?
Well, that's really a case of going back to basics, Anchor, but let's do it. Why on earth did Keir Starmer select Peter Mandelson for that job in the first place? I mean, of course, these days, he doesn't like to talk about it. He says, I made an error of judgment. But I mean, the argument back in December 2024 was, look, Donald Trump is coming into office. Peter Mandelson may have had a bit of a checkered past, but he's someone who's been in several British governments. He'd been a trade commissioner in the European Union. He had business links all over the world. He was a sort of a mover and a shaker. Now, obviously, that has worked out really badly, especially when all of those emails were published showing the depth of that friendship between Mandelson and the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Now, why this has become so massively problematic for Keir Starmer, and why this man, Olly Robbins, who until Starmer sacked him, was head of the Foreign Office, is Starmer's defense is, look, had I known about all these security issues, look, I would have stopped him from getting the appointment. But what Olly Robbins has said is, look, when I joined the Foreign Office in January 2025, Downing Street weren't in the least bit interested in any of these concerns about Mandelson. They just made it clear they wanted to get him to Washington ASAP.
This has been going on for quite some time. We've talked about it a lot here domestically in the UK, but a lot of people, I can also sense some sense of fatigue as well around this story.
All the indications are the public aren't really interested in the nuances of how people are vetted for high office in this country. What's damaging about it for Keir Starmer is the fact that it's back in the news. It highlights three things for the voters. One, that he selected Peter Mandelson in the first place when there were all sorts of things known about him publicly. It was known publicly that he had a close friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. It was known that he had business interests in China and Russia. So one, why on earth did he do it? Second, it's bad for Keir Starmer because he'd promised that if he won the election in 2024, it'd be no drama Starmer. You wouldn't have all the ups and downs and scandal of the Conservatives' years in office for 14 years before that. And then the third thing is that he promised that he would be the kind of person who the buck stops with him. He would always take the can if anything went wrong. And here you have all of those things, lots of drama, lots of scandal, and a sort of senior civil servant, an official, getting the sack rather than the Prime Minister.
Where does Keir Starmer go from here, Rob? He's been in charge for less than 2 years, and a lot of people suggesting that he should be relieved of his duties. Where does he go from here?
Well, it does feel as though the last few days have been another low point in a very, very difficult premiership for Keir Starmer. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that having won the general election with this massive landslide in 2024, he is now almost the most, he competes with Liz Truss, but just about the most unpopular prime minister ever, which is really something. And there is a sense very much at Westminster that he is a prime minister living on borrowed time, that he won't see Labour to the next election, which is due to be in 2029. But the problem is, who do they replace him with? I mean, they don't have an obvious leader in mind. There are some important elections coming up in a couple of weeks, so it's unlikely they'd want to remove him before that. And the other thing that the Labour Party is very sensitive to is that even though they may not like Keir Starmer and think that his position is hopeless, they're kind of very worried about being accused of changing prime ministers every 5 minutes, just as the previous Conservative government was in the habit of doing. So in a way, if you like, it's a nightmare for the Labour Party. They're in power, but their prime minister looks unpopular beyond all reason. What do they do next? They're in a bind.
Will people be looking at the UK from afar and saying, well, hang on, you could potentially have 5 prime ministers in the space of 4 years, potentially? Why is it so challenging for a leader to hold on to their position and do it with some strength and confidence, not just from their colleagues, but from members of the public around the country?
There are all sorts of challenges and reasons why this instability is happening. I mean, some of it is just because Britain, like many other countries, is not experiencing growth. That has a massive effect, the economic stagnation. People have a sense that the state isn't delivering what they think it should in terms of services. There are also all these huge questions about sort of social cohesion. People look at the question of immigration and feel unsettled. And so these are huge challenges for any prime minister to make. Now, on top of all of that, I think it's often said that the politicians themselves make matters worse by making bad decisions. But then there's this other big, massive overriding issue about ungovernability. And that is the suggestion that the politicians themselves are to blame by not leveling with the voters, saying, look, in Britain, we have some difficult choices to make about the level of taxation, about what exactly the state can provide, what it can't provide. And I guess that the charge to be made against the politicians is that they're always promising milk and honey to the voters. They never say to them, this is going to be the downside of some of the things that we're suggesting. And it's for that reason that when prime ministers, whether it's Sir Keir Starmer or anyone else, get into power, you kind of find that the reality hits the dream of campaigning, and that's where all the sort of disillusion and discontent and then mistrust in politicians kicks in.
Rob, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Our UK political correspondent, Rob Watson, joining me. Fascinating insight from Rob from Westminster, as always. Do subscribe to our channel. If you do like more on the Global News Podcast, you can also download us from wherever you get your podcasts from. Do give us a subscribe and a follow. Thanks so much for your company.